A wonderful good morning to everyone. On behalf of the board, management, and staff of exporTT, we want to welcome you to today's session on exporting safe food to Canada, understanding the regulations, executed in collaboration with the IICA and Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Today, we are joined by representatives from the IICA delegation in Trinidad and Tobago and Canada, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, the High Commission to Canada to export to Trinidad and Tobago, exporTT Limited, and participants from our CARICOM member states. Before we begin, I would like to introduce representatives from these agencies to warmly welcome you to this session. We commence with Ms. Diana Francis, representative for the IICA delegation in Trinidad and Tobago. Diana.
Thank you so much, Ms. Phillips, for the welcome and introductions. Good morning, everyone. All protocols being observed. I bring you greetings on behalf of the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture, our delegations in Trinidad and Tobago and Canada, and also the Agricultural Health and Food Safety Program in IICA, headquarters Costa Rica. IICA is extremely pleased to be collaborating with exporTT and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency in this webinar. Originally planned for Trinidad and Tobago, we agreed that it would also be beneficial to our CARICOM agri-food sector stakeholders. So allow me therefore to recognize the farmers, the food processors, and exporters who represent the foundation of the agri-food sector in this country and across CARICOM. I also wish to recognize representatives of private sector and the government, business and export development services, whose purpose is to facilitate the ease of doing business for these agri-food producers and exporters, whether or not their target market is domestic, CARICOM, or extra-regional. To our colleagues from the other international and regional organizations, such as the Canadian High Commission in Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados, welcome. So thank you all for joining us for this morning's session on exporting safe food to Canada. Expanding agri-food exports has been a long-standing policy priority of all CARICOM governments, and for a number of reasons, Canada has always been an export market of strategic interest. My IICA Canada colleague, Dr. Jean-Charles Lavallee, will confirm that demand in Canada for such products is high and growing. And I am also sure that exporTT will also confirm and have the analysis that such market opportunities do indeed exist and can be accessed once all safety and entry conditions are met. In this current reality, dominated by the global public health crisis that has impacted all dimensions of trade and economic growth, there can be no compromises in taking all steps necessary to assure safe agri-food trade. Therefore, it is our expectation that this opportunity to engage directly with CFIA will allow farmers, processors, and exporters who are targeting Canada to make the right decisions in investing in capacity which will allow them to access and establish market presence. Our colleagues from CFIA's International Affairs Branch are poised to share with you information that you should know and to clarify any aspect on exporting to Canada that falls under their portfolio. We hope that the dialogue emerging from this webinar will also be valuable for agricultural development and export facilitation agencies such as IICA and others, exporTT, DEXI, and NAMDEFCO, to allow us to be more strategic and relevant in the delivery of our support for export capacity building. We look forward to the interaction and to the outcomes that will contribute to a sustained capacity of our farmers, processors, and exporters to increase and maintain a consistent flow of a diverse range of safe agri-food exports to Canada. So welcome all, thank you, and we look forward to the conversation this morning.
Thank you, Diana. Addressing us at this time is the Acting General Manager of exporTT Limited, Mr. Dhanaraj Hariprasad.
Thank you, Tanika. Good morning to all in attendance. I'm very pleased to personally welcome each and every one of you to this Export Seafood to Canada webinar. Food safety is an area which exporTT has been working with companies on for some time. In fact, even before we were known as exporTT, we were working with Kariri on the best practices for various industries in our food and beverage sector. It has not always been easy going as companies weighed the risks associated with food safety against the cost of investment. There was definitely some reluctance on the part of companies to sign on back then. Today, there is little option for companies or consumers Today, there's little option for companies. As consumers are more informed, social media is more prevalent, and government regulations have improved to protect their citizens. The truth is that it just takes one mistake to do serious harm to both your brand and your company's image, both locally and abroad. Sometimes regulations like these could be seen as barriers to enter in markets, but following such regulations ensure that your products are safe for all, your customers, both locally and abroad. And they also add to your competitiveness in international markets and are well worth the investment. exporTT will also be very happy to provide guidance and financial support to assist you along the way in the implementation of these regulations. When we first saw the Food Safety Modernization Act implemented in the US, we kept an eye out for something similar in Canada. We eventually heard about the Safe Food for Canadians, and we have been following that closely. It is finally here. And I'm happy that we have so many persons in attendance. I'm seeing 88 right now to learn about the regulations and be ahead of the curve in terms of meeting it. I would like to welcome our partners from the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation on Agriculture and the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Your tremendous support is truly appreciated, and without it, this session will not be possible. We thank you and look forward to your keen insight, experience, and knowledge that you will be sharing here today. Our exporTT training team continues to place the needs and demands of our exporting community as a priority, and I encourage you to continue to find work. To our attendees, the question and answer segment is your time. Please don't hold back. We have the Canadian Food Inspection Agency and the IICA representatives here today with us, and they are the ones who know the regulations best. So let's make the most of it. On behalf of the exporTT team, I warmly welcome you to today's webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhanaraj. We are so delighted to hear from Ms. Nathalie Durand, Executive Director, Horizontal and Strategic Initiatives, International Affairs Branch of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Ms. Durand.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to this workshop that will introduce you to the Canadian import process and the safe food for Canadian regulations. As mentioned, my name is Nathalie Durand. I'm the Executive Director of the Horizontal and Strategic Initiative at the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. And today we will be providing you this workshop. I want to first thank IICA for working with us to organize this workshop. This is a collaborative effort, and I hope you'll find the information provided through the workshop to be useful. I want to also thank the presenters before me, Mrs. Francis from IICA and Mr. R. Prasad from exporTT. So again, looking forward to the collaboration with those organizations to facilitate the export of agriculture and agri-food products from Trinidad and Tobago and other Caribbean countries. I would like to note from the start that Canada is an exporting country of agriculture and agri-food products. So we do understand quite well, the complexities sometimes of exporting products to other countries. So this workshop today is really meant to give you the information you need to export safe products to Canada. If after the workshop there will be a Q&A session, so if you have any questions, please do feel free to raise those questions through the Zoom chat function. And as well, if you have any questions afterwards, we'll be happy to answer those questions. I would like now to introduce my colleague from CFIA who will be providing the workshop. So without further delay, I will let Mrs. Alia Blais, Policy and Program Leader with the Food Import and Export Division at the CFIA, do her presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Natalie, and good morning, everyone. I'm very excited to be here today to present for you. Now, I'm just going to take one moment to share my screen so I can share my presentation with you, and we will go from there. Let me see here. Okay, I'm going to assume that everyone is able to see my my presentation. So I will just get right into it, and then we can discuss any questions that you have at the end of the presentation. So, as my colleague mentioned, my name is Aaliyah Blais, and I work in the International Affairs branch of the Canadian Food Inspections Agency, and specifically in the Food Import-Export Division. And so today, what I would like to do is just to take you through a little bit of information regarding the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. Just want to explain a little bit about us. I want to explain the import process. I'll give you a little bit of an overview of the Safe Food Canadians regulations, go over some of the labeling requirements and some food safety standards and guidelines. And then what I'd like to do at the end is take us to our CFIA website, where we have a plethora of information available both to industry in Canada, as well as exporters and foreign suppliers located in Trinidad and the Caribbean. So to provide you with a little bit of context on the importing market in Canada, Canada is the 5th largest importer in the world. And we import approximately $44 billion a year in imports from over 191 countries. Now, approximately 40% of the food products sold in Canada are actually imported. And many of the foods that are produced in Canada are also made with imported ingredients. And we have a few factors that play into why there's so much imports in Canada. Those are due to some of the free trade agreements that we have with our trading partners. It's due to the cultural diversity here in Canada. And then there's other factors such as the availability at the national level throughout the year, because it tends to get a little bit chilly up here in the north, and we can't always grow and produce. It becomes a little bit challenging to create everything that we need, that we want to consume. So to give you a little bit of an overview of what the CFIA is, or who we are, we were created in 1997, and we actually have a pretty broad mandate. And that mandate encompasses food safety, animal health, plant health, and international market access. We are a science-based regulator, and our goal is to ensure the well-being of Canadians, our environment, and our economy. So we achieve our mandate by doing the following things: by preventing and managing food safety risks, by sustaining the plant and animal resource base by protecting plant resources from pests, disease, and invasive species, preventing and managing animal and zoonotic diseases, contributing to consumer protection, and facilitating market access through a food, animal, and plant regulatory regime. Now, CFIA is not the only government agency or organization that plays a role in imported food. We have a few other government organizations here in Canada that also provide oversight to verify that imports are compliant with standards and regulations. And some of those organizations also take enforcement action when industry is not being compliant. So I've just I've touched on what the CFIA does. The other organization that plays a role in imported food is Health Canada. Their role is pretty important to us because they're responsible for establishing national health, safety, and nutritional standards for food. They set the standards for food safety and nutritional content for food. They conduct health risk assessments and evaluation on food contaminants and additives. And they also actually approve the use of food additives in food, as well as they set residue tolerances. The next person that we have on this list that does play a role in imported food is Global Affairs Canada. And Global Affairs Canada is the lead for negotiation of the free trade agreements that we have in place. But they're also responsible for the issuance of import permits related to some of the supply managed agricultural products that we have. And then the last on the list here, Canada Border Services Agency, we work very closely with the CBSA. And so what they do for us, and they assist in the administration and enforcement of legislation as it applies to imported products. Now, they also look at imported products, not just for food, but any sort of imports that's coming into Canada, just to clarify that bit. But we do have a very close relationship with them. So typically, or what they do really is that they perform import inspections at airports, as well as other Canadian points of entry. And typically the customs inspectors will review import documentation related to the imported goods to verify that there's permits and certificates and license that may be required are there. And they're doing that on behalf of the other government organizations such as the CFIA. They will also perform examinations, examinations of incoming goods. So what that means is that they will look at the shipment that's actually coming in and verify that that shipment is matching the information that's on the documentation. So CBSA and CFIA, we work very closely together. A lot of information flows between the two agencies because they are literally our first point of contact with the imported goods. And then we also will take advantage of their border lookout process when we're looking to identify high-risk commodities that are entering the country. And we will also liaise with them when they're doing border inspections. And so we work together. It's a really good working relationship between us and the CBSA. So this slide is giving us a little bit of an illustration of the shared responsibilities across the import continuum. So what we're seeing here on this slide is that we're seeing the relationship between CFIA and CBSA, and then I mentioned that CFIA sets the regulations and the policies, and CBSA enforces those regulations and policies at the Canadian border. Now, what I want you to take away from this illustration is that foreign exporters and foreign suppliers need to work with the importer located in Canada, the Canadian importer, to understand requirements that are Canadian requirements, unique to Canada, and that those requirements that may be different than other foreign trading partners. Some of those requirements would be things such as French and English labeling, specific allergen labeling, specific use of food additives or chemical residue limits. Knowing things like priority allergens or chemical residues that can differ between Canada and other trading partners like the EU or the United States is important. It's important to be able to differentiate what is there for the US versus what is required for the Canadian market. So when importing goods that would fall under the authority of the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, we can pretty much sum up the process for importing within 6 components or 6 steps. And here the slide says generic import process. And that's because, as I mentioned in the previous slides, our mandate is broad and we cover plant and animal as well as food. So this process would be applicable whether or not you were importing plant or animal any commodity really that's regulated by the CFIA. So when we look at the first component, I guess, this is the requirements. Now, the requirements are set by CFIA. That's through our policies and our regulations. And we make those requirements available and known to the importer through our automated import reference system. We typically call it AIRS for short because it's quite the mouthful. But what this is it's an online reference system that is based on the international HS codes. And so the importer uses this system to select the HS code, select the commodity that they would like to import, and the system will tell them what are the requirements to import that product. What would be the admissibility requirements they need to meet in order to have CBSA release those goods at the border for them. The second piece is the permission. It will be the importer's responsibility to obtain the appropriate permission for importing. With respect to food, almost all foods that are being imported into Canada require a Safe Food for Canadians regulation, Safe Food for Canadians license. So once the importer has received their permissions, they understand what the requirements are, they can then proceed to importing the food. And prior to importing the food, they would submit their information, their intent to import, known as the import declaration. They would submit that to obtain the approvals that their admissibility requirements have been met. And once they've received that admissibility approval, then their shipment can continue on to the border. Now at the border, as I mentioned, that's where the shipment meets CBSA. And CBSA again will confirm whether or not those requirements for admissibility have been met, and they will make a decision on whether or not the product will be permitted into Canada. So once the product or the shipment has passed the border, it can then move to where we see number 5, the first destination. So at the first destination, what we would see here is that depending on the commodity, it may be flagged for a CFIA inspection, meaning that a CFIA inspector would come to verify the goods, or it'll be just approved to be further distributed into the Canadian market. And then the last bit, or the last component of our import process is reporting, and that's really our CFIA reporting that we do just to do reports and analyze trends on imports and foods and goods that are coming into the country. So now I'm just going to, I've kind of touched on some of the general processes with respect to importing, and now I want to go into the Safe Food for Canadians regulations. So these regulations were very exciting for the CFIA because when we were able to pass the Safe Food for Canadians Act in 2012, it gave us the legislative base to consolidate 14 previous food regulations into one single set of regulations, the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, or the SFCR as you'll hear me refer to it. So the SFCR is consistent with international standards such as Codex, and it does align with a lot of the preventive approaches being implemented by a lot of our trading partners. It is prevention focused and outcome based, and it applies to food that is imported, exported, or on the slide you see it's written interprovincially traded, meaning traded between the Canadian provinces. The CFIA, or the SFCR also applies to food animals when the meat product or the meat from those animals will be exported or traded between Canadian provinces. And then there are some provisions of the regulations in traceability and labeling that apply to foods that we would call intra-provincially traded, meaning that it would remain within one province. So it's not moving around, it's just staying within one province. So the SFCR, there are licensing, there's preventive controls and preventive control plans and traceability. These components of the SFCR were the transformational components. I'm going to go over these in a little bit of detail in the following slides, in the coming slides. Not necessarily because they're going to be requirements that you specifically will have to meet, but I just wanted to give you a little bit of a flavor of what the Canadian requirements are so that you are able to, you're understanding what the importer will need when you work with an importer in Canada. So the first component, transformational component that I mentioned, licensing. And licensing, the goal of licensing in the SFCR is to assign accountability and enhance the rigor of food safety up and down the food supply chain. And now it's activity-based, meaning that it's based on what the license holder is doing and not what sort of product they're producing. And the intent of license requirement is also to further align Canada's regulation with the international markets or with the international food safety standards, and to improve access to global markets. Now, with licensing, to import into Canada, a license is required. So this means that the person that is importing food into Canada requires a license, and typically that license holder will be the importer physically located in Canada. As a foreign supplier or foreign exporter, you do not need a license, an SFC license, to export to Canada, nor do you need to register with the CFIA in order to export food to Canada. The second key component of the SFCR is preventive controls. And so preventive controls are steps that a license holder must take to prevent, reduce, or eliminate food safety hazards. They are outcome-based to allow for flexibility and innovation. And they also include procedures for investigating complaints and recalls. Now, the preventive controls, those are based on internationally recognized principles of food hygiene, such as the good manufacturing practices, the good agricultural practices, and the principles of hazard analysis and critical control points. So the importer that you're going to work with in Canada, that importer will want to know or want to ensure that the food that you're supplying to them has been manufactured under preventive controls. Now, the preventive control plan. So this is the second part of preventive controls. And the preventive control plan is a written document that demonstrates how risks to food are identified and controlled. And again, the preventive control plan also includes a description of the measures taken related to the consumer protection and market fairness requirements. So the importer will need to maintain a preventive control plan, a PCP, for the food that they're importing. So you may receive questions from the importer regarding the food safety hazards and the control measures that are in place for the food. The CFIA has created a lot of guidance for importers around the preventive controls and the preventive control plans. And that guidance is available on our website. And I do recommend that you take a moment and visit our website to get a sense of what sort of information the importers will need, and it'll help with those conversations between yourself and the importer when they're trying to find out a little bit more about the foods. The last transformational element or component of the SFCR is traceability. And the traceability requirements aim to trace the food one step forward and one step back through the food supply chain. And so the importer will be required to keep traceability documents or records for all of the food that they import. And then there's going to be three main things that the importer will need to do. They will need to identify the food And that would be through a common name or and the name and principal place of business, lot code, or some other unique identifier. They will need to trace the food back, meaning that they'll have to keep records on when the food was provided to them and by whom that food was provided. And then they'll have to trace the food forward, and that's to whom they've provided that food and on what date they provide that food. So it keeps a very clear timeline, chain of custody, if you will, for the food. So importers will want to ensure that the food that they're importing has a lot code or a unique identifier, because this is going to help them meet those traceability requirements that they need to meet. So to summarize the components of the SFCR and how that applies to importing and the importer. So to import, as I mentioned, Safe Food for Canadians license is required. And so the importer will need to have this license to import. The importer, again, will need to have a preventive control plan. They will need to maintain procedures for handling and investigating complaints and recalls. They will have to keep the clear traceability records that I just mentioned. And they'll need to ensure that their food supplier is manufacturing food under the same conditions as food prepared in Canada. So that's how those pieces play into, the components play into importing food. So the importer that you will work with, they're gonna need some information from you. They're going to need information about the products to understand the hazards reasonably expected to occur, and to get a general understanding of the complexity of this food supply chain. They'll also need to know the food supply chain to ensure or to determine how that supply chain may affect the hazards associated with the food. They will need to know if the food is fully meeting the Canadian requirements, because this will help them determine whether or not the food requires any sort of further processing once it's arrived in Canada, or if it needs to be relabeled in order to fully meet the requirements. They're going to want to know information about the manufacturing practices and the food safety controls of the food in order to demonstrate that the food is being manufactured under the conditions that provide the same level of protection as what is already described, what is described in the SFCR. If you are a part of a food safety certification program, they're going to want to know a little bit about whether or not that food is subject to that program. They're going to want to know the components of that program to determine whether or not it is fully meeting the requirements that are outlined in the SFCR. And they may ask you for documented evidence that shows that you're in good standing with that program. The importer may also ask to visit you and to verify the effectiveness of your controls. All of this information that I just went over, all of this information is all part of the information that the importer needs to build their preventive control plan. And their plan will help them demonstrate to us in CFIA that their food is meeting the requirements of the regulations. So now I want to touch a little bit on exporting fresh or processed fruit and vegetables to Canada. I did notice that we had a lot of farmers, fresh fruit and vegetable exporters on the call this morning, or processed fruit and vegetable exporters. So what I want to do is just kind of touch a little bit to explain the parts of the SFCR related to this. Now, what I've noticed since the SFCR came into force is that various different industries have a different concept as to what falls within fresh fruit and vegetables and what falls under processed fruit and vegetables. Now the SFCR has a specific regulation, or sorry, a specific definition for those products. And, but what I want to do is provide you a little bit of some examples of what would fall under those categories. So when we're speaking fresh fruit and vegetables, what we are talking about here are whole, washed, sliced, cored, peeled, grated, chopped, or cut fresh fruit or vegetables. This also includes prepared salad kits in this category. And then under the category of processed fruit or vegetables, what we find in that category would be things such as fruits or vegetables that are packed in hermetically sealed packaging, such as a fruit cocktail, or such as canned breadfruit, for example. We would also find frozen fruits and vegetables in this category, fruit or vegetable juices, jams, jellies, chutneys, and as well, we would also find dried fruit and vegetables. So on this slide, there is a web link, or sorry, there's a link here to a guidance document that we have on our website. And the guidance document is actually one that we refer to very often because it provides provides a lot of examples of the categories that we have that fall under SFCR. So let me just I'll take a moment here and see if I can click on this and show you what the page looks like. So this is on our CFI website, and it is available. You're able to access it because it is on our external website. And it's a document related to licensing. However, it does break down the different commodities that we would find in the SFCR and the different sub-commodities under those major, like higher level commodities and then sub-commodities. And then we provide some really useful examples. So if I were to, for example, I'm just pardon my scrolling here, but if I were to scroll down to where we would see, actually, you know what, I'm going to, it's probably quite tiny, so I'm going to make my screen a little bit bigger. If I were to scroll down to where fresh fruit and vegetables are within this document, we can see that it gives a little bit of a definition, but then more importantly, it gives us a little table that talks about the different types of commodities that we'd see in these categories. So like I said, I do recommend you taking a look at our CFIA website and accessing some of the information that we do have on there. So regardless, this leads me to this. So regardless of the food that's being imported, it must meet the Canadian requirements. And that means it must meet the food safety standards outlined in the SFCR. So what we're saying is that if it's meeting the SFCR, then it's being prepared or grown under the same conditions as food that is prepared. Sorry, under the same conditions as food being prepared or grown in Canada. Specifically for fresh and processed produce, depending on the product, there may be specific standards or grades that must be met, including things such as container sizes or container fills. These grades and standards are a part of the regulations in what we call IBR documents. They are documents that are incorporated by reference into the regulations. And so if you're exporting fresh or processed fruit and vegetables to Canada, I do recommend that you speak to your importer to ensure that the products will meet any sort of applicable standards. In addition, if you're exporting organic foods to Canada, they must be shipped with the appropriate organic certificates, and they must meet the applicable organic labeling requirements. So I just mentioned the organic labeling requirements, so that will lead me into a little bit of the an overview on the Canadian labeling requirements. And so most prepackaged food in Canada is required to adhere to these labeling requirements. And so they must be labeled with the common name, date marking and storage instructions, dealer name and place of business, list of ingredients and allergens, net quantity, and nutritional facts table. Now, with the common name, there are some exceptions related to fresh fruit or vegetables. And so that's fresh fruit and vegetables that are packaged in a way where it's clearly identifiable in the package what the product is. They are exempt from having the common name written. Example, if you have a bag of apples and you can see that they're apples, you don't necessarily have to say apples on the bag. Date marking and storage instructions. So date marking is related to products that have a 90-day shelf life or less. And so it would require a best before date. And storage instructions, if those storage instructions, if the product cannot be stored within ambient room temperature. The dealer name and place of business, that is related to the person that is responsible for the food. And so typically that would be the importer or the manufacturer. The net quantity marking needs to be on the principal display panel, and it needs to be in metric units. The nutritional facts table needs to be displayed under the appropriate Canadian requirements, using appropriate requirements. And, oops, excuse me. And the list of ingredients and allergens, the ingredients must be listed as per the Canadian requirements, and the allergens must be listed as per the Canadian requirements. Now in Canada, we have 10 priority allergens, which include eggs, milk, mustard, peanuts, seafood, sesame, soy, sulfites, tree nuts, wheat, and other cereals containing gluten. So those are really important to know for the Canadian market. Also within the labeling requirements, again, I've mentioned this in the previous slides, the label must be in both of our official languages, English and French, and the information on the label must be truthful and not misleading. For imported food, the country of origin will be required on the label. So I do recommend that you do discuss with your importer what elements of the labeling requirements you'll need to meet that will be required for the product that you're going to be exporting. When you export food to Canada, you must ensure that it's conforming with the food safety standards and guidelines for Canada. So in the very beginning of the presentation, I did mention that some standards for food in Canada may not be the same as foods that you may be currently exporting to the United States or the EU. So when you're exporting food when you're making food that's going to be exported to Canada, it's important to be aware of what requirements are specific to Canada, such as limits for pesticides in fresh fruit and vegetables, or the permitted food additives that would be allowed in processed products. So for more information on importing food and the Canadian requirements, I do really recommend that you visit the CFIA website, because this information, as I mentioned, is available to both you and the importer. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us just to I would like to point out a couple of the pieces that I mentioned in the presentation. And I'll just click on the web link. So this is the web link for, at the bottom of the slide, the web link for the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So here we go. English. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is take you to where those standards and guidelines I was talking about were. So when we're looking at the the Canadian Food Inspection C web page, where we want to go for this is food safety for industry. We're scrolling down, and just there is a link right on the page for safety standards and guidelines. So when we click here, this is where all of our guidelines are listed. One of the things I did forget to mention in that previous slide is, as you recall, in the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned that Health Canada sets the pesticides limits, the food additives. So you'll notice that on this page, a lot of the bullets they start with Health Canada, because these are the limits and the standards that were set by Health Canada. And so they would link specifically to that page, the Health Canada webpage. So I'm just going to go back to the beginning of the page now, and where I'm going to take you now, which I think is another part that I mentioned in the presentation, it's the food labeling requirements. Now, what I wanted to point out to you is the link for the industry labeling. And when we click on this link, it brings us to our industry labeling tool. This labeling tool is very user-friendly. It has a lot of information about the different requirements that need to be met for depending on the product. But some of the things I want to point out is the things that I mentioned. So grades, standards of identity, food additives, and this is all part of the core labeling requirements that I spoke of. So as you recall, we talked about the common name and country of origin, date marking. So there's more detail within these links here. As we scroll down, we can see different parts of the labeling requirements. Again, these labeling requirements are in the SFCR, but this tool is super useful to industry in determining what those requirements are. So things like organic products, and then when you scroll further down, it is broken down by the type of food. So what we would see here, for example, fresh fruit and vegetable has its own link, processed fruit or vegetables has its own link, and if there's anything else, chocolates, confectionery, these are all pieces that are that would break down the requirements for those specific products. So I'm just going to go back again to the main page. We did food labeling requirements, standards, and what I'm going to do now is take you to the webpage on importing food. So I'm going to click on the link. I'm going to specifically choose food. And so under this, on this webpage, I think it has a lot of the information that we refer to importers. So when we get questions from importers here in Canada, this is the page that we refer them to. This is the information that's referred to them. So I think it would be a good idea to take a look at what's here to understand what the importer has to do or has to meet when they're planning to import food. An important part to this is the preventive control plan for importers. So this is a guide that we had drafted or that we created for importers on the preventive control plan, so that they can understand how they need to meet those requirements when they're working with someone that's outside of the country. And then a part of this preventive control plan is templates. So again, this is another piece of information that I do really, truly recommend that you take a look at. And so the templates that we've created really helps the importer understand what the requirements are. It actually links to the specific pieces of the regulation requirements and explains a little bit about how they need to meet those. So with that being said, I want to say that I do recommend, like I can't recommend strongly enough how important it would be for you to go to this website, take a look at the information, because I think that what it's going to do, it's really going to help when you're having those discussions with the importer. you'll be working off the same terminology, you'll be working off the same page and understanding. So it would really help with those conversations when you're making those working together. So I think that's all I have for us. So what I'm going to do is just, I guess, open it up for questions.
Hi, Leah.
Hi. I'm going to unshare my screen.
Hi. Okay, so
if I can.
So far we have 3 questions. So far we have 3 questions. First up from Carla Kennedy. He's asking, if your product meets the requirements, can it be denied entry?
Sorry, what was this? Can you just repeat the question?
If your product meets the requirements, can it be denied entry?
So we are not, CFIA is not the authority on whether or not the product can physically enter Canada. The CBSA, the Border Control, are the ones that have that authority. So typically the way that process works is we would give them a recommendation to tell them that, yes, they've met our requirements, but at the end of the day, it is up to them based on their own processes and intelligence and what they're working on. So I don't want to say no.
Okay.
Because I can't really say on behalf of CBSA.
Okay, understood. Carla, I hope that answers your question. Second, from Niran Bihari, he's asking basically how much variations are there if you are HACCP and US FDA compliant?
So the US is one of Canada's biggest trading partners. And so a lot of our regulations do align very closely. I think that the pieces that would, and their regulations are also based on HACCP as ours is, but the pieces that would be, that would not align would have to do more around the consumer protection and market fairness aspect. And then we do have slightly differing standards and grades for certain products.
If I may. Good morning, everybody. This is Jean-Charles Lavallée. I'm the IICA country representative for Canada. If I may, exporTT, I'd like to continue Alia's presentation with a few elements I think many of your participants would like to hear. And it also will help answer some of the questions that I've seen in the chat room. Permission to continue? Okay, well, good morning, everybody. So I used to offer some training as well to people wanting to export to Canada over the years, and many things that I've learned during that time, I'd like to share with you in the next couple minutes. And you'll find that the importers, what they really are interested in, first and foremost, the most important thing to the importer is food safety. And you saw in the introduction, they talked about, for instance, allergies. And there are issues here. There are a lot of food recalls. It can ruin your branding, and it would ruin all of the island's ability to export to the country if one product of any commodity is affected. And it gets into the news, and then people will avoid products from your country. It's that severe. It's very, very important. And HACCP is a minimum. Basically, the importers meet market demand from large grocers, often like Loblaw or Sobeys or Metro. And they have quality schemes that they are much stringent beyond HACCP. What they want is GFSI, which means you have to be BRC, SQF, FSSC, one of them quality schemes. The Americans often use SQF. here we're quite broad. BRC is quite popular. And so the importer will help kind of making sure that you meet the quality standards of the Canadian market. And HACCP is like is a bare minimum that fits into these quality schemes. And you heard Alia speak to global agriculture practice or good management practices. Those are all necessary, but on your way towards getting to SQF or BRC. And that's kind of, Canadians are eating more fruit and vegetables, more produce. They want quality too. We're an aging population overall, and health becomes even more important with age. And so Canadians, and they're putting more demand on quality products from the market. And fruit and produce and vegetable consumption is going up, but you're competing with many, many groups. And as Alia said, US is by far our biggest trading partner, export and import. On the produce side, Canadians import like over $6 billion of fruit, just fruit. And 40% of that is the US, 20% of that is Mexico. So you've got, and then you add Chile, and you've got like 2/3 of the market right there. You're competing with big players. And so you kind of need to find your niche. We are a smaller market than the US. If you're targeting the US market eventually, because you're asking about USDA, FDA, they have different standards, and you would have to work with their system differently than with Canada. But if you're able to export to Canada, and we've at least with smaller volumes to start, a couple containers per week, every week, then you're able to export to the US. We're like a door to the US in the sense that in terms of your abilities. And when I said food safety was number one in terms of the imports to Canada, number two is more like reliability, because they won't import one container of your product. They're going to import 2 containers for 6 months every week. Like, they want reliability of supply. We eat fruit and vegetables all year long. We have our summer season. It doesn't provide a lot of food. We are 20% of the market in Canada is covered by domestic production-ish. And so we import 80%. And Toronto is by far the second or third largest market in North America. And a lot of that comes from California, a lot of that comes from Florida. And like a third to 2/3 of the produce market goes through the terminal, Toronto terminal. It's massive. And your largest market will be Ontario. And you also have to meet other regulations like translation. You make your labeling. If you have fruit and vegetables that are not processed, is less an issue. But if you have a processed market, product, the labeling must be bilingual. There's a lot of issues that come up with translation, with your labeling. It won't get to the border. Like, they'll just turn it around because it doesn't meet the requirements. That happens a lot, actually. And so that's one thing you need to keep on your agendas to make sure you got that labeling on. Another thing that I'd like to recommend to exporters is Canada is very used to websites, email, and immediate responses. So if you want your purchasing order to go through, you got to make sure you get your answers to the importer, Canadian importer, right away. They don't like to wait more than 24 hours. You're going to lose the client. So communication is really, really important with Canadian importers, making sure you have when they're doing their kind of shopping to see who has product elsewhere in the world, from the Caribbean, for Toronto, Montreal, various places where there are large Caribbean communities who might purchase your product. They will want to see a professional website. They want to see an email that they can reach out to quickly. And so that your image is very important in terms of your branding. Other things that are important beyond reliability, beyond food safety, is the quality of the product. Is it fresh? Is it nutritious? Is it, what's the feel in my mouth? How does it, can it survive transport? There are a lot of issues around that you have to consider in terms of maintaining quality product once it gets here. And another one is price, but that's negotiable. You can play around with that. It's not the first thing they're going to negotiate. And then other things in terms of niche markets where maybe you can access the Canadian market and be more competitive in other areas because you have a culture, what can I add? Is it certified a certain way? Is it packaged a certain way? Is it no added sugar? Is it vegan? Is it ease of use? Is it environmentally friendly? Is it microwavable? I mean, then if you're going to look at manufacturing and processed products, those are all things that that Canadians love to do, because up to COVID, before COVID, we used to eat about 25-30% of our food would be in restaurants. The rest would be at home. So we shop more, and millennials and younger generations eat out all the time, a lot more than the rest of the public. But now with COVID, they're eating more at home. So they're eating more fruit and vegetables at home, and they're not eating, they're buying their product in grocery stores. So you're seeing an uptick there for produce. Canadians generally, if you look at the average expenditure, how much they spend on food every year, a typical household of 4 people in Canada, it's about $8,000. It's pretty big purchasing power. And about 20% of that is fruit and vegetables. So they're going to be spending $1,500, $2,000, maybe, because there's a range, on fruit and vegetables every year. That's a lot of money. And a lot of that's bananas and other things that it's tough. If you don't have that kind of product, you're out of the market anyway. But we also import a lot of blueberries, strawberries. Chile is a huge competitor. Mexico is a competitor, and Costa Rica, in Colombia, and some countries dominate the coffee market, dominate particular products, and so you need to think about which commodity markets you want to try to sell your product into and get. Maybe it's easier for you. I would probably focus more on Quebec and Ontario versus like BC. They tend to eat a lot of fruit and vegetables, as is Quebec. Quebec is probably the province where they eat the most produce. They're the ones who eat the most at home. They're the ones who cook more. And there are provinces like Newfoundland that eat almost no produce. So and it's a small market, 500,000 people, versus Ontario and Quebec, which is half the country. So those are your largest markets, and you may consider those markets first. I think I've spoken a lot, and I've seen a lot of questions come through in the chat room. So I wanted to give those introductory elements to you so you have a better understanding of our market here in Canada. And even with winters, we eat a lot of fruit and vegetables. I saw that was one of the questions. We produce throughout the whole year. It's a snack in school lunches. We bring apples to work. It's part of who we are. We eat fruit and vegetables. It's part of our nature. A lot of people want to look at 5 a day. We're not there yet. We're more like 4. Women do much, much better than men in eating produce. So you may want to target women in your marketing. That's just an idea. Just because they consume more produce. That's part of your due diligence to figure out your markets. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Lavelle. We have a few more questions. So Peter Neckles is asking, are there specific requirements for exporting hot peppers to Canada?
So I'm assuming that the hot peppers are fresh. So we don't have there won't be any requirements. As I mentioned, it doesn't matter what the actual product is. It just has to meet all of the requirements in the Safe Food Canadians regulations. So I'm going to make an assumption that the hot peppers are fresh, so would fall within that discussion or category of foods that I mentioned, where the importer would need to have the license, that they would have to ensure that the food's being grown under the same conditions that of food that would be grown in Canada. But there's nothing specific for hot peppers in itself.
Okay, thank you. Dwayne John, he asked, can I develop my own food safety plan? Meaning that I have a food safety plan, but not certified by a recognized certifying body.
So you are free to do this, to have your own food safety plan and food safety controls, etc. As Dr. Lavallée mentioned, when you're trying to export to those bigger players such as Sobeys and Loblaws here in Canada, they would probably prefer an actual certification body such as GFSI. But for your purpose, you can do your own food safety plan. You need to be able to demonstrate or show the importer that you're going to work with that that plan is meeting those requirements, because that's what the importer is going to want to know. Does your plan meet the requirements outlined in the regulations?
Thank you, Alea. We have another question. It's coming from Sharon. She's asking, in Canada, which GFSI scheme is preferred by buyers, SQF or FSSC 2200? 22,000.
Yeah, 22.
I don't know.
Experience, Alia, I would say it's BRC and SQF.
Okay, so Dr. Lavallée has responded to the question, but I do know that we have industry here in Canada that are under the different schemes.
Right. Mark Bonio, do you have a database of importers? Do you have any studies done on what niche products that Canadians may be specifically interested in from the Caribbean? Example, he gave the example of hot peppers.
I don't, Dr. Lavallée, do you have?
There is an importers database, and they can look it up. It's on Industry Canada's website, I think. And they can go and go by category, specify the area, specify the product, and you can get an idea of who in Canada has been buying product from that region or for that product. That exists, that database is publicly available.
Okay. Yeah, it's just not something that CFIA tracks.
No,
that's why.
Industry Canada.
Okay, no problem, noted. That is it for right now in the chat box for questions. I am not sure if anyone else have anything. If not, we can probably proceed with the next part of the presentation.
Well, I think you're thinking of closing remarks. The Q&A is the end of the agenda. I'm happy to stay on for more questions.
I'm not seeing anything else coming in at this time, so let me invite participants. You have just heard a host of information. Now is the time to ask all your questions. We have IICA online, we have CFIA here. Feel free to ask what you need. Yes, the presentations along with the recording would be made available to all participants. Julia Bishop is asking, is home-based manufacturing accepted? Now, Julia, what do you mean by home-based manufacturing? Julia, would you like me to unmute you so that you can speak to us? Okay, she's saying home-based, meaning not a large facility. So I'm guessing someone who produces at home or manufactures at home.
So yeah, okay, someone's kitchen. It doesn't, so what's important here is not where you're producing or manufacturing the food. What's important is whether or not there are food safety controls, whether or not there's HACCP principles being applied, and how you can prove that information and that those controls are effective at controlling the hazards and prove that to the importer. Now, I can't speak on behalf of what an importer here in Canada will want, but I know what they need to meet, and they need to ensure that the food is meeting the food safety requirements that's outlined in the preventive control section of the SFCR. So I think that, again, it will be up to the importer and whether or not they're comfortable with the manufacturing location of the product.
Well, and frankly, if I may, I don't think you'll have the volumes to fill containers to meet the market demand here. Like they won't buy one container, and small production, like there's benefit for you to do what you do in your local market. Absolutely. And it's like the other fellow who says, you know, should I have my own food safety plan? It's a must. It's like you cannot sell product if it's not safe. So be sure you have a plan. And if you end up exporting here, it's important so that we can trace it back if there's an issue. So, and like the food safety is absolutely paramount. But I would just say there is value in home, small kitchen, even in Canada. There are a lot of people who do it here, and they have markets for that. There's demand for that, but they can't meet more than, you know, a couple thousand clients, and we're 37 million Canadians, and so we want to eat fruit across the country. In terms of tonnage, we're talking about, it's probably just I'm trying to remember here, like just cranberries alone, if I had to pick just a commodity, we're talking about like 170,000 tons a year. So, you know, you can't compete with that. Because of scale, they can bring their prices down. You can't. So you have to, if you want to do one container for a small Caribbean market in Toronto, because it's a niche product that's in demand, you might find luck. But I'm guessing you're probably better off selling to your local market. And then once you're scale up and you're large enough and you can have the volumes, then maybe export to the Caribbean region, you know, because of culinary tourism, they discover Trinidadian products. I'm just thinking out loud, like that. It's not a recommendation I'd make right off the bat. You're probably a couple of years away before you're able to export.
Okay, great, thank you. Dwayne is asking, Industry Canada will also assist in finding importers as well. So I'm guessing he's asking whether or not Industry Canada will also assist in finding importers as well.
I'm sure I understood that one. Did you get that, Elia?
I think he's asking whether or not there's, and I'm not sure if it's Industry Canada or Global Affairs, but there's a government agency that helps industry find importers. But
there's a group I'd highly recommend. Sorry, Elliot, to interrupt. There's a website that anybody who wants to export to Canada, I strongly, strongly recommend you join up and sign up to the TFO Canada website. They also have pretty much kind of a Bible on exporting to Canada. A guide you can download, and that's their job. The Trade Facilitation Office can assist exporters provide they've been doing it for decades around the world, and their documentation is in French and Spanish and other things. So they're very well known, they're robust, they're solid. The guide is very well written, and it has all the information you need to start considering, and all the steps you need to put into place to kind of assess your export readiness. So if you want to export, please download their export guide from TFO Canada.
It's Andrew from the Canadian High Commission. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add another thing. I think that's a great suggestion. Another thing, I mean, there's also the Trinidad representation abroad. I mean, you have a consulate in Toronto, and you have an embassy in Canada. So, you know, similar to what I do here on the ground to help Canadian exporters, Capacity, I can't speak to the capacity, but I mean, that is something that maybe even exporTT could look at, is engaging the representation of Trinidad in Canada to see, whether they can assist with that. Maybe it's doing a study or a report for the industry, or they may have they may already have a database of potential importers, particularly in the diaspora sort of serving segment of the market. So that's just another suggestion.
Thank you, Andrew. Dalton is asking, is there any special phytosanitary requirements for fresh produce into Canada from the Caribbean?
So typically, when there's a phytosanitary requirement, it usually has to do with products where there's soil related, or that's going to be also imported as part of the product if there's a lot of roots. But for pepper and tomatoes, again, I'm assuming it's just the fruit. There isn't any phytosanitary certificates that are required. Typically, so the importer, along with the license, if a phytosanitary certificate is required, they would also be required to connect with CFIA and obtain the appropriate certificates that they would need. But like I said, generally it falls within products that have a root or has the risk of soil also being imported with the product.
Thank you. Peter Neckers, he's just asking whether or not you can repeat the documents exporters need in order to export to Canada.
So there's no specific documents. What you'd have to do is you'd have to work with the importer in Canada, because the importer in Canada is ultimately the person responsible for ensuring that all the requirements are met. But what there are on the website, as I showed us on the website, there's a lot of information related to what the requirements are. And so that was what I was trying to show with that website preview, was where you can go to find information related to the labeling, related to the specific requirements required for a product or the standards.
Diana is asking, what is the scope for small and medium-sized producers who want to export to Canada but cannot meet the container load requirements? Are there importers who would accept small volumes?
I don't know if I am able to respond to that, Jean.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I answered earlier. If you have a cooperative, and then you work across multiple farmers or businesses, and you can raise the volume to get that one container, that's one way to start. If you've got a request from particular community of Caribbean in Toronto for certain products that you have, demand is there and they're willing to pay the price, sure, it can work. But I suspect they like to ship full containers and containers on a reliable basis, where they, that market wants your product week over week over week. And do you have the volumes, and can you provide that kind of regular flow? That it's a challenge. I would say it's an uphill battle.
Tanika, can I also just add a point to Jean-Charles' point?
No problem.
Yeah, so I think that's a very good answer that Jean-Charles gave. I also would say that Canada also faces similar challenges. I mean, we, relative to our neighbors to the south, we have a lot of small producers that are trying to break into international markets with very, very good products. I spent 3 years as the agriculture counselor for Canada in the Middle East, and I saw this issue, continuously. Of trying to compete with either bigger markets or markets that were closer to the destination. So we couldn't always compete on price. But one thing is that consolidation is a very important element for the Canadian industry. A lot of the smaller producers go through consolidators. And I think for Trinidad and Tobago, even if you're, by your market standards, a fairly large size player, Consolidation is a very important strategy. So I don't know if there's anybody in Trinidad that currently is filling that role of consolidating products from multiple exporters and doing a lot of the logistics behind the export, because that's an invaluable service. Even for Canada, it's something that I think there's still room for greater growth in that segment, because a lot of our products get consolidated out of the US, and they get shipped out of New Jersey or other places like that to other markets. So Canada is also developing that area. I think Trinidad needs to look at that kind of a model. But you still, like Jean-Charles said, you still have to be export ready. You still have to be able to scale up. Labeling, you have to have the ability to label. I think maybe this is a question for Alia, because a lot of the times when we're exporting to markets, they allow a sort of a sticker label over top of the domestic label, which consolidators can handle. I mean, a lot of them can do that kind of, they can take the products and they could do the labeling for the exporters. But I don't know to what extent this might be valuable for the exporters here, Ali, if they can use sticker labels over top domestic labels with French labels, because that sometimes the labeling can also be a big barrier. But my point is consolidation is very important.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point about the sticker label. It's actually a practice that is done here in Canada when, and I think I mentioned it in one of the slides about whether or not the product before it's being exported completely meets the requirements. So this is part of those conversations that you would have with the importer, let's say with the labeling, or needs to be restickered. So I think I mentioned that in my slide, that when you're having a conversation determining whether or not it's fully met, the importer needs to know these pieces. But it is a practice that is done.
Alia, did you want to talk about MRLs at all, or because I saw a question go through about cadmium and heavy metals?
Imported chocolate. So I wouldn't be able to tell you what the MRL is off the top of my head, but we do have on the Health Canada website, or in that webpage that I showed us for the standards and guidelines, one of the links is specifically for contaminants in food. The way that web link will work is once you go there, it is a database of information. So you would select the commodity that you're looking to import or export, and it'll list out all of the permitted tolerances for things such as pesticides, heavy metals, although generally you don't want to obviously have a lot of heavy metals in the product that you're exporting to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I'm seeing something from Alita. What kind of requirements are needed for labeling on nutritional facts?
So it depends on your the product that you're importing, but like I mentioned, I took you to the industry labeling tool, and in that industry labeling tool there is a section on the nutritional facts table and the requirements around that table. So I do recommend going to the website itself and taking a look to compare what is there and the product that you are looking to import or export, sorry.
Right, I know I see a few more questions in between Alea and Dr. Laval. The questions would have been answered as well. Jeanette, I missed your question, my apologies. Do you want to unmute so that you can ask it?
Hi, sorry, no problem. What I wanted for Leah, could you just explain a little more on the date marking? Thanks.
Oh, so when I spoke about the date marking, it was related to products that have a 90-day shelf life or less. So those are products that would require a best before date. So
Then how do I get back the thing again? Picture.
So, I mean, what I would do, or what I would recommend for you, is to, again, go back to that industry labeling tool that I pointed out on the website. And there is actually a link specific to the date marking for retail packaged foods and for foods such as foods that have that 90-day shelf life or less. But that 90-day shelf life or less requirement was related to the best before date on the product. And the storage instructions, if it cannot be stored outside of, or cannot be stored in ambient room temperature.
Wow, okay, on mute. Hello, this
Hi.
is Joseph Peltier, Joey Peltier.
Yes, go ahead, Mr. Peltier.
Yeah, I wanted to ask whether the conditionalities for entry in the Canadian market are the same for herbs, dried herbs, grinded herbs, grounded herbs, and such as moringa, turmeric, and also ginger.
So to import the herbs into Canada, again, you would have to work with an importer located in Canada who will be required to have their license. However, specifically for the herbs, you would just have to ensure that if it's being packaged in appropriate packaging that meets the requirements. Some of the things with respect to herbs and spices, if you're putting in any sort of additives, you have to make sure that those are permitted in those herbs and spices. Some of them, sometimes it's something that we see actually on a regular basis, that we do get imports of ground herbs that have had some sort of additive desiccant, let's say, that is maybe not permitted. So again, I would recommend going to those health food safety standards and guidelines, and taking a look at what those permitted additives are for the types of products that you're using. When you look at the web page, when you do go there, just to explain a little bit, for additives, it is broken down by how those additives are going to be used. So it would be permitted additives, for example, for the purpose of being a desiccant, or for I can't think of the categories at this point in time, but I do recommend that you take a look at those permitted food additives, because that is a piece that we always we see regularly in those types of imports.
Thank you.
I saw a question go through, if I can, around seafood. I just wanted to answer that one quickly. The market is very small. Canadians don't tend to eat a lot of seafood. Fish is much more popular than seafood. The average expenditure, what we spend on food per household every year, is about $200, which is not a lot. The Canadian guidelines ask for about 2 portions of 75 grams per week. We eat 1 portion every 10 days. So it's very small. And the frozen fish is more popular, breaded fish is more popular. And then fresh, you're thinking about maybe trout and salmon. There's a lot of whitefish, tilapia, pangasius. You'll see there is demand. It's not like there isn't. There's fish in every market. And if you're in a coastal community, people eat more fish. But inland, it's available, but you're competing with people who our pie isn't growing very big. In Canada, the market, the size of our market here, the population size of Canada by 2050 may be 55 million. We're 37 million. So you're competing for a pie that is not very large, in the sense that you have to fight with existing competitors in the market for that same pie, because the fish market isn't growing very much. Fish consumption in Canada has not moved in 40 years. It's relatively the same. It's only growing because of population growth. It's not growing in absolute terms. Like per person, it's not growing. In fact, in some places of the country, it's declining. So, seafood is delicious. You may want to think of the restaurant sector. The problem is with COVID is the restaurant sector is pretty much closed right now. So you may consider other markets right now because of COVID, because of the small demand for seafood products currently, unless it may be frozen in large stores and you have a competitive price. But that's the current situation right now in Canada.
Okay, we have one from Vijay. He's asking who would be responsible for ensuring the requirements are met by local producers or processors from the Canadian end, and also what quality assurance systems are there in place for monitoring and auditing?
I'm assuming, if I understand the question correctly, you're asking who would be responsible for ensuring that the requirements are met by the producer, or like for the producer or processor located in Trinidad, I'm assuming, or the Caribbean. So that would be, it's not CFIA. We are not, we would not be coming to do any sort of inspection or to verify the requirements. It falls on the importer to ensure that they are sourcing from someone that is meeting those requirements. If you cannot show to the importer that you're able to meet the requirements, they may choose to find a different supplier, because that's what we've told them here on our end is ensure that you're sourcing from suppliers that have food safety controls in place. I think the second part of the question, what quality assurance systems are there in place for monitoring and auditing? Not sure I understand what the monitoring and auditing, what exactly?
Well, if I can, maybe he's asking about how it's done here. So there are third-party auditing systems, and they all need to be certified. So it's pretty strict here. We have a worldwide reputation as being among the best in the world in terms of food safety. So it's not a competitive issue. Like there are some places like Australia where it is a competitive issue. Here it isn't. It's understood. It's intrinsic in the system. There's no competition. We're all safe. And so it gets audited regularly by third-party auditors like GFTC, or there are groups in Quebec that do it too. There's a cost to that, and there is a difference between those who also trade among provinces or within their own province. So if I'm a Quebec producer for the Quebec market, I need to have HACCP, but I don't need to have these other quality schemes because I'm not exporting product outside Quebec into another province. So that that kind of regulation it doesn't concern an exporter outside Canada. So in your case, the products here, the certification of your product is your relationship with the importer, like Elia said, and the sourcing and all that is done. So, but the buyers get certified here in terms of the retailers, and they have their own schemes that they can do on themselves, that they hire, and they must demonstrate it. And the smaller ones don't do it because they don't have to intra-provincially, but inter-provincially, yes, because they're registered. It's a bit complicated for someone who is outside Canada to understand, but there is an auditing system and it gets done.
Tanika, your microphone is muted.
Hi, good morning all. Can you all hear me clearly?
Yes.
Apologies, I'm working from home, so if you hear some dogs barking in the background or something, that's the nature of things, right? So my company, we traditionally not operated out of Trinidad. We provide consultancy in a large part. However, we do have clients exporting out of Guyana, some of the smaller islands. So in terms of volume, most of the time when you're exporting to Canada, and I can say like with one client, I believe it's Loblaw Companies, which owns No Frills, Regal Canadian Superstores.
Yes.
we export coconut water to them. And they take something like in the vicinity of 10 containers every 2 weeks.
Fantastic.
And that's their minimum order. But it's sold as a very niche product because that we can trace right back to the plantation, even into the lot numbers, which batch of trees those bottles of water are coming from. So traceability is very important. Most of the time, it's the importer will have very strict standards that you must maintain if you are to even get a contract. On top of just being able to meet required volume. There's nothing worse than you have a great product, you send it up to the supplier, they love it, and then they say they need 6 containers of it or 4 containers, or they can't meet the order because that's just as bad or worse than just having a product. Consolidation. So what we have normally done, there are other importers, however, who target the niche market. Like we have a product going into Toronto for imported there. They have a very big West Indian population there, so a lot of the products are your anchors and pepper sauces and these kind of things. And they are willing to purchase smaller quantities, right? But usually what would happen in that case is you consolidate multiple suppliers into one container or air freight. Traditionally, before it used to be done by air freight, however, with COVID and so on, that has tamped down a bit. So with regard to, small producers, I won't say that there's not a requirement, but you do still have to adhere to the food safety standards and all the quality controls. But they are big or small, it doesn't matter. Usually what would happen is that depending on who is doing the consolidation, so like in our case, we worked with a packing house where they went and they did the certification on behalf of the suppliers and the traceability and so on. So they would make sure that the suppliers are compliant with their requirements. Part of this, they are required to be compliant with the international standards. So it's very much a trickle-down process, but it is a process that needs to be adhered to if you want to get into the market. With regards to herbs and so on, everything is on the website. It is a requirement, the labeling and so on. In the case of moving from the American market, because most of our products with regards to like coconut water and honey from Guyana is split between the US market and the Canadian market. It is a matter of labeling. So for the Canadian market, we had to add in French as one of the requirements to the supplier. So the labels are physically different, right? But the traceability backend systems and so on are the same. So essentially, all bottles are labeled with a QR code. If you buy a bottle, there you can actually scan the QR code and it will actually show you the provenance of, which batch, which lot, and which supplier provided the bottle. And that, I think, actually exceeded in some cases the standards. But we built the system because we were targeting multiple markets, be it the US, EU, and Canadian, well, just general global markets for that level of traceability, right? It was originally designed for cocoa and coffee, so it was the whole concept of from plant to plate kind of traceability, right? But yeah, a lot of the stuff that has been provided here is on the Canadian website and so on, and they have pretty much given you all the links there. Just a matter of to go in and take a look and see, and well, of course, I'm pretty sure exporTT and DECO and so on are more than willing to kind of help facilitate the process where possible. We actually don't have it as bad here because unlike some of the other countries like Guyana and so on, where the logistics are a real challenge, we have very good access to ports and packaging facilities I think here. Right? Of course, if anybody wants and they want can reach out to me if they need any other added advice with regards to that. But that being said, we have been exporting products in the Canadian market since 1995, I believe, when we started. We started mainly with fresh fruits and vegetables, and that has changed over time. You know, as requirements and so on have changed, we have had to drop some suppliers, added other suppliers, and so on. That's my 2-cent contribution.
Thank you, Nira.
Excellent contribution. That was very good. I love stories like that because for you, these are great to inspire your colleagues in Trinidad and Tobago to export. You've got that like leadership, you've got that experience, you're a model. So to me, it's wonderful to hear from you. And by the way, there's strong growth for coconut water here. I think it's growing by like 25% a year over year for the next 5 years. So
it is
a great product.
We command a premium because our coconut water turns pink, which not many people know, but that's when it has a very high level of antioxidants, and we actually have a special offline process to try and prevent it from oxidizing. But that has to be shipped under very strict temperature controls. It must be shipped at -3 degrees centigrade across the entire supply chain.
Excellent.
You know, so quality
I
control.
love it. It's part of your sales pitch.
Yeah.
We have about 10 minutes left, correct?
Yes, we do. Tanika Collins' hand was raised at some point. I don't know if he still wants to ask this question.
Colin?
I can't hear her.
Are you hearing me?
We're hardly hearing you. You're sounding distant.
You're very weak.
Can I type the question? Are you hearing me now?
We're hearing
Very
you
weak,
a
but
little.
go ahead.
Okay, I'm seeing in the chat he had written, does the requirements, or probably are the requirements the same for cooking oils and essential oils?
Not the same thing.
They're
Same thing. The cooking oils would fall under this requirement, yes?
Yes, so any food, all food falls under these regulations and these food safety standards, including, because I think I've seen a few questions in the chat regarding specific products. Again, what's important is to know what the food safety requirements are, what the standards are based on that web page that I showed everyone, and to ensure that the product is meeting those standards. So doesn't have any if cooking oil, if it has a specific standard that it's not being adulterated with something else, or essential oils doesn't have some sort of additive included in it. I think there's I'll quickly touch, there was a question on gluten-free products. Again, the requirements are the same regardless of the product. It's just to understand that the food safety requirements need to be there. The hazards need to be controlled. You need to have your critical control points. If you're labeling, it needs to meet the Canadian labeling requirements. The biggest thing is also with the labeling is the labeling of your allergens. If, for example, something that's gluten-free, if you're going to say it's gluten-free, ensure that it's gluten-free and there's no additives that were added that could cause some adverse effect in someone that has a gluten intolerance. So these are very familiar things that we encounter at the agency when we're looking at imported products and domestic products too. When these are the things that come up with respect to these types of foods.
Thank you, Alea. Kamira, I am seeing your question that is that, well, for NAMDEFCO. What I can do, I source another question that would have been in the chat as well. I would consolidate those questions and forward it to our contacts at NAMDEFCO. We do have them on the session, but with probably only like 5 minutes left, I would consolidate the questions, send it to them, and have them give you a call or email, if that's okay with participants. Any other questions at this time? We have approximately 5 minutes left.
Did you want to include time for closing remarks?
Yes, I do. So with no other questions, no more hands raised, I would now pass the mic to Mr. Andrew Maraj, who is the Senior Trade Commissioner, High Commission of Canada to Trinidad and Tobago, along with Ms. Maria Padilla Benjamin, and followed by Maria would be Ms. Diana Francis, all of whom would be delivering the closing remarks.
Tanika, am I first? I assume I'm first. I was the first one mentioned. So I just want to say thank you to IICA for inviting me to participate in this wonderful session. It was very informative. I think that Alia did a fantastic job in really concisely presenting the SF, the Safe Food for Canadian regulations and the framework in Canada. And Jean-Charles did a great job of bringing some of the trade elements to things. So I don't have a lot of new information. I just wanted to be very brief in recapping what I thought were some of the important things and add maybe a couple of insights from my experience in the sector as the Agriculture Council for Canada in the past. I worked closely with CFIA and Agriculture Canada. And I think that a lot of the lessons that Canadians were learning will be applicable to Trinidad and Tobago exporters as well, because although you're small relative to Canada, we were small relative to China, where I worked, and also small relative to our competitors in the US in particular. So first of all, I want to say that there's often a perception that, new regulations, new requirements are a hindrance or a barrier to trade. But I wanted to emphasize that these regulations are actually there to facilitate trade in a couple of ways. Number one, I think consumer confidence has become so important in all markets around the world. Consumers want to have more information about their food, and they want to have more assurances that the food is safe. If they don't feel confident, they won't consume it. They'll look for other options that are maybe closer to home or things that are meeting higher standards. So these kind of regulations address the need for consumer confidence in the food they're consuming. Secondly, I think that it's welcomed by industry. I know the Canadian industry for a while, leading up to these new regulations, we're seeing a trend around the world where government of big food importing companies were saying, we want the government of Canada to certify these foods. It was always the meats and the produce that were getting certification, but those products that were kind of in the middle aisles of the grocery, your processed packaged foods, were not subject to as maybe a rigorous regulation process, and it's not as much government certification. This allows the government of Canada to say, these products meet a standard that we can certify or sign off on. So this facilitates trades. This allowed us to stay into markets where, some importing countries were saying, well, we want more assurances, not just a manufacturer's declaration. We want the government of Canada to say this meets certain standards. And now we can do that. So that's excellent in terms of market access. And to add to that, for Trinidad, one piece of the puzzle you'll need to engage maybe exporTT on getting help is to see how are these requirements being harmonized internationally, so that you're not just doing something for Canada, doing something different for the US, doing something different for the UK. How are they being harmonized so that you can meet one standard and access multiple markets? And I think that Alia referenced the fact that Canada is aligning to Codex, aligning to the international standards to ensure that we're not creating new barriers to trade. The second point is beyond access, and I think Jean-Charles talked a lot about this, is once you can access the market, how do you succeed in the market? And I think one of the speakers talked about consolidation. I mentioned consolidation. exporTT can play a role here in helping Trinidad, smaller scale exporters, to access consolidators who can fill those containers. And I think that just because you're small, don't be discouraged that you cannot trade internationally, because you can scale up. Everybody started small, but you need a strategy and you need support and you need access to facilitators in the supply chain. So that's very important. Another thing is branding. you can't do it alone. And I think Jean-Charles talked a little bit about, you need to have a Trinidad and Tobago brand or a Caribbean brand. So this again is somewhere exporTT can help. In Canada, we had, branding campaigns just about Canada, not about any particular exporter, but about Canada. Quality is in our nature, things like that. So when you think of Canada, you think of quality, you think of food safety, you think of open spaces. This helped our exporters to leverage their Canadian connections to sell their products. Trinidad, you have to do the same because you're going to get lost in a sea of ethnic foods. It has to be a Caribbean brand. So maybe something like, for example, a branding campaign for Trinidad products or for Caribbean products that exporTT or others can help with. Very important. And I think that, think about e-commerce. In this environment, more and more people are going onto e-commerce platforms. Maybe you create a Caribbean page or a Caribbean platform. That's what Canada did in China. We do it around the world, where you access a country platform, a country page, and you have access to all these wonderful different products from that region. So think about that in terms of your marketing strategy. And the last thing I wanted to mention is a little bit about food trends in Canada, because it's very important to know that the Caribbean market is not similar to Canada, I think, in terms of food trends. Canada is very much more focused on healthy, organic, local in some cases, and if it's not local, it has to meet high standards for freshness and quality. So I think that we're spoiled in Canada, and we eat wonderfully fresh vegetables and fruits, but not all year round locally. We try to eat locally as much as possible, but as Jean-Charles mentioned, we're cold, right? So we need to import, but the stuff we import is very, very high quality. If your produce is not high quality, not fresh, not crisp, not very, very tasty, it won't succeed. So consider that. Think about things like eco-packaging. That's very important to Canadian consumers. Very, eco, healthy, those things are big trends in Canada. I don't want to talk too much more because I think that I've said enough, but I just wanted to emphasize the point that Alia made about work with your importer, whether it's through your consolidator or your export agent. Work with your importer. They can help you navigate the requirements in Canada. A lot of this may seem overwhelming. You should know it, but work with your importers to understand how to navigate the process. And with that, I would like to again thank my colleagues at CFIA who did a fantastic job today. IICA, thank you very much. Also a fantastic presentation on your side, and I'm happy to have been able to participate.
Hi, Andrew. Thank you so much for those bits that you've added. As the training manager for exporTT, I want to say thank you to all the participants for being a part of our Exporting Safe Food to Canada conversation, and also to all our speakers who shared openly and the insight that you gave. exporTT is delighted to have partnered with IICA and the CFIA to bring this workshop, which was conceptualized in September of 2019. And I'm truly grateful to Lisa and Diane at IICA Trinidad for making the necessary contacts and ensuring that you were able to receive this information today. As all our speakers said, this is just the tip of the iceberg, but a complete understanding of the regulations is critical to ensure that you have the foundation upon which you can commence or expand your export journey. Shortly, you will receive an evaluation form from TANICA, and we at exporTT, we value your feedback. So please take a moment to let us know your thoughts about this session, as well as other solutions that we can provide to assist you with exporting to Canada. Do enjoy the rest of your day, and thank you very much.
Colleagues, this has been a very enlightening and a positive exchange. We all know, and I think coming from this meeting and this conversation today, that exporting is a process, and the dynamics of the global agri-food trade requires that we all stay in step or a step ahead, particularly because of changing information and changing requirements to assure continued market access. For us in CARICOM, agriculture is important. The export market for agri-food products is extremely important because it's a driver of both sectoral growth and as well as economic growth in this part of the world. For CARICOM, the Canadian market continues to be very appealing, extremely appealing, and within reach. But according to CFIA, once an exporter can meet all of the safety and entry conditions, and according to IICA Canada, JC, It is very competitive. So we also have to meet the conditions, but at the same time, also have to compete with others, a lot of others who have also targeting the Canadian market for agri-food products. So we have a work cut out for us. I wish, though, as Maria said, to really thank Lisa, IICA Agri Health and Food Safety Expert, and as well as you, Maria, for your tenacious stewardship in making this webinar happen. As you said, the conversation started since around this time last year, and therefore we bringing it to fruition in this webinar. I'd also like to thank JC in IICA Canada for facilitating and for keeping the CFIA connections open, particularly as we had disruptions in our regular business routine, working from home, working in office, the disruptions. And as you realize also, Jean-Charles himself has a wealth of knowledge on trade issues. So we appreciate his interaction and his continued engagement with us on this webinar. The willingness of the CFIA colleagues to engage and remain connected is really, really deeply appreciated. And Aliyah didn't tell you, but she does have a deep special connection to Trinidad and Tobago. So that is critical. The presentation, however, was a general introduction to what you need to know. And let me assure you that the IICA exporTT CFIA collaboration does not stop with this webinar. This connection is going to be important moving forward to help you build export capacity for boosting market access for our products in this part of the world. We also export the CHC in TNT and Barbados to also be a very strategic partner in this connection moving forward. As you just heard from Andrew, he summarized the session expertly, and he also provided some great lessons from Canada, and also some critical considerations to effectively plan and build the capacity to access and compete in the Canadian agri-food market. And I think this is even more critical to build critical mass and supply capacity to make exporting to the large and high demand and competitive Canadian market very viable for us, especially small producers, small exporters. So according to Jean-Charles and according to Andrew, we need to have an export strategy that must consider volume consolidation to meet weekly container load demands. That's important, as equally important as being able to be export ready and meet the regulations for market entry. I think I would like to emphasize what Aliyah said, and I think it was a question from one of the participants, that while CFIA is a regulatory agency, and even if they recommend and you meet the requirements, I think she did mention that they don't necessarily have the final decision to ensure that your product moves from the border. So there are a number of elements, a number of issues that you need to be aware of in terms of exporting to Canada that have to do with regulations, entry requirements, and as IICA Canada also said, other demand and importer considerations. So I think this is just the beginning of the conversation. There's so much information to be shared, there's so much knowledge to learn, and I think we need to go beyond this webinar to support further exploratory discussions, to build more capacities, and to maintain and strengthen our connections to Canada. And this is critical not just for the exporters, the processors, or the farmers. I think it's also more important for us, the persons who support you, to be able to do your business better. It's important for us to also consolidate so that we pool together all of our collective resources and deliver support for the private sector to ensure that whatever you need to know, whatever you need to do, that we are able to facilitate you effectively. So on behalf of IICA Canada, IICA headquarters, IICA TNT, also on behalf of exporTT and all our stakeholders, we really thank you for participating, and we wish to assure you that this conversation does not stop here. We will reach out again to the CHC, both in Trinidad and Tobago and Barbados, who have very strong interest in this area, to ensure that the connections continue and to ensure that we are accessible to you for more information, for more support, and so forth. And to our local colleagues, exporTT, NAMDEFCO, and all of the entities responsible for facilitating your business and for facilitating your capacity development to export to Canada, I would like to say thank you for the continuous engagement with IICA. Thank you for supporting all those activities, and we look forward to continued support, continued collaboration as we move forward. So we hope you have a good rest of day, good rest of the week, and we want to encourage you, please do not stop the conversation. I noticed on the chat, there was someone, a private sector entity, I believe it was Niran Bihari, who offered his services in terms of providing for the support. Please reach out to anyone who can support you, because we're all in this together. And as I said before, agri-food exports to Canada and everywhere else is going to be important to drive our sector forward. So on behalf of exporTT, on behalf of CFIA, thank you so much for joining us. And as I think Maria and Tanika indicated before, the recording and the presentations from this webinar will be available to you. And if there's any further information that you require, I'm sure you can reach out to both exporTT and Lisa here in IICA, and we'll be happy to receive your queries and provide you with further information and answers. So thank you all, and really, it was a wonderful conversation.